Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar, Short-Term Rentals, the Missing Puzzle for Sustainable Tourism. My name is Cristina Núñez. I am the Managing Director of Nextur. For those who are less familiar with Nextur, we are the network of European regions for sustainable and competitive tourism based in Brussels. And we are glad to share this webinar with all of you, organized by our Tourism of Tomorrow Lab team, which is at the forefront of the work of today's session. I would like to welcome José Luis Córdoba, our project manager in Tourism of Tomorrow Lab, and also our data scientists, Daniel Iglesias and Ana Moniche. Thank you very much for this collaboration. You might wonder what the Tourism of Tomorrow Lab is. Basically, it's the new department of our network that puts into action the commitment we all have to support destination managers, destination leaders in delivering effective decision making based on systematic measurement in a way we can better manage. And this is why today's session is organized in partnership with AirDNA. So I would like to thank and welcome Bram Gallagher, who is Senior Economist in AirDNA. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for this collaboration, which we hope is going to be fruitful and promising for all of us. I would like to thank the important audience which is with us today. Last time we count registration numbers, we were past more than 100. So let's see how many followers we have today and which is the positive impact we can bring with the exchanges that we're gonna follow in a minute. Yes, we are all aware that the topic of this webinar is at the core of the European tourism ecosystem, short-term rental accommodation. And yes, we are all aware that there is a European regulation on short-term rental accommodation, which is on the table, on the decision-making table. And this is not the reason why we are organizing this gathering. We are here today because we want to offer a macroeconomic perspective of this market. So it's a very technical webinar with the aim to offer a better understanding on this activity, short-term rental accommodation, in terms of economical impact, in terms of analyzing the demand, what are the occupancy rates, the revenues, the length of the stays, the whole through analysis of data, and hopefully comparing the performance of different destinations across Europe. These data and insights will be brought by AirDNA, will be analyzed and discussed with our Tourism of Tomorrow Lab team that you know now. And throughout the session, it will be combined by Q&A, where we together, hopefully, we can pull out all this knowledge for better managing our territories. Because in ToT Lab, we believe that collaborative knowledge making decisions grow in systematic measurement and in a way that we can help you to go into this journey data-driven destination, so we can transform ideally these tourism destination models into more sustainable ones, because we know this is urgent and we have important challenges to solve today. So this is why we want to explore today how we can start measuring the short-term rental accommodation impacts, also which conclusions can we take and which decisions we can implement to better balance everyone's interest at destination level. I wish you a fruitful debate full of data and informative, and then perhaps the opportunity to turn into a collective and constructive brainstorming of ideas, opinions, perhaps partnerships, proposals. Let's see how far we can go today. And I would like to invite you also to use our chat function for any questions that you would like to be addressed. Irene Paulinelli, our communication manager, is going to help you to collect these questions. And our colleague Justin Bouters, sustainability officer, is also here to support. Thank you very much, and let us go.
Good afternoon, everyone. I don't see if you are watching my presentation. Thank you very much, Cristina, for your introduction. Okay, thank you very much, Daniel. Yes, as Cristina has explained, the ToT Lab is aimed to better understand the markets and to identify actions that can improve how us as destinations behave and really improve our social, economic, and environmental sustainability. This is our aim, and we are focused on trying to understand what is happening. And this is the main reason of this webinar, we are going to try to shed some light in this interesting and controversial market. We have three main goals during this webinar. We are trying to improve our understanding about this market in European regions. As Christina explained, we are trying to understand learn more about occupancy rates, average daily rates, about concentration of the demand, about different economic variables that many of us are aware of the importance of the market. This would be the first aim or goal of this webinar. The second would be trying to identify different research lines that could help us to solve territorial imbalances through this data. We will see that we cannot analyze the market as a whole. There are different markets, and we can divide in different categories. And of course, we should do different approaches to these different markets. And in the our third goal would be trying to find out possible collaborations with private players, as the one with AirDNA that we are starting to promote through this webinar, but also with other private players and with regions, because as you will see during our presentation, we have some examples, important, interesting researches that could conduct to future steps. So with these goals in mind, we have structured the webinar in three parts. In the first one, we will shed some light from a macroeconomic analysis of the market and introducing some of the issues that really we are concerned about in this market. In the second, we will give the floor to the expertise of Brian Gallagher. Of course, he knows much better than us the possibilities of the data that they are managing, and we hope that he can give interesting insights about the markets, the trends, the behavior, and what can we expect. Learn more about some of these issues that we all have into our minds. And the third part of the webinar, we will introduce to Daniel Iglesias, where analyzing of putting the focus on one kind of destinations, regions, of one part of this global tourism market. We are going to put on the table some specific research oriented to a methodology oriented to help destinations to improve their performance in some areas where they are not crowded and really are completely different, and so other saturated areas that we are all aware of. So this is the structure. So starting with my part, I would like to share 5 main ideas. The first is the economic impact of this short-term rental in the European travel industry. Just one idea to understand the importance. We think that this is obvious, but it's important to put this on the table. The second, another idea about the concentration level of the supply, that also it's substantial to understand different researchers' approach of this matter. The third, how short-term rentals have behavior after the COVID, and we will see, it's very interesting how the variables have changed and have evolved after 2019. And the fifth is trying to understand how short-term rentals analysis can help to promote more sustainable destinations. What research lines can be put on the table, conducted to improve sustainability. This is an open debate. We want to share a concrete methodology, but it's an open debate, and we also want to understand the main concerns about this matter from a data analysis point of view. So the importance of the market in the economy in Europe is evident. We can just look to the slide where short-term rentals represent 1/4 of tourist accommodation offers in the EU. The source is the document from the European Commission, the EU Transparency Rule for short-term accommodation rentals, published in November 2022. Almost 200 million nights spent in short-term rentals during the first half of 2022. It's also an important figure. And 89% of EU citizens who have booked short-term rentals that would recommend it to others. So, well, it's indisputable the importance of this market. Another, the second idea about this global analysis is the concentration level of the supply. We can understand that the demand is very concentrated in certain points, and as a consequence, the supply is also very concentrated. And this is happening not only in this category or type of accommodation industry, it's happening in the whole travel industry. Using data from Euromonitor International, I think that you can see very good in the slide, but in this ranking about city destinations in 2022, we can see that the top cities like Paris, Dubai, not Amsterdam, we will talk about this later, Madrid, Rome, are also very high in the rank in the short-term rentals outlets in 2022. So there is a correlation, a clear correlation between this, the rank as a destination and the rank as your supply of short-term rentals. In the case of Amsterdam is outlined because, the position is much lower, and of course the recent regulation probably likely has affected this strongly. So this is another idea that could go deeper in further analysis about how regulations are affecting. So it's an example of how we need to understand data to really, well, for example, understand how regulations are affecting this behavior. During the preparation of this webinar, we have access to some information provided by AirDNA that, related to some of the next two regions, we have access to data from them of Andalusia, Flanders, Lapland, Valencia, Catalonia, Emilia-Romagna, Toscana, Occitanie, Normandy, Scotland, Basque Country, and Navarra. And well, just to highlight this idea about the concentration, we have selected this province in the south of Spain, in Andalusia, is Cádiz, and you can see the concentration in some parts of the coast and in some inland also parts. We could do this analysis about all the regions in the net, and in general terms, we would say that just the concentration is a reality, as we saw in the previous slide. The third idea is, as I said before, the behavior of this market post-COVID. We also have used this data provided by AirDNA, and with the similar regions, but when we put in the table region 1, region 2, 3, it's not equivalent. Region 1, it's not Andalusia. We have mixed all the region, but because our purpose here is just to offer a global view about what's happening. After this slide, we could see this in more specific charts, but you can see, for example, if we analyze the data, the variable available listings, we can see that from 2019 to 2022, in most of the regions have decreased. Probably Brian will analyze this later, because we suppose that this is changing if we incorporate here data from 2023. Occupancy rates have increased in most of the regions. Most of them positive. The price, it's also the key variable that really have experienced a very important increase. And just to think about this, because the length of stay have decreased, and well, as you know, the length of stay, it's important to improve the sustainability, to extend this length is probably important to improve the sustainability of our territories. If we analyze these variables in the charts, you can see that, for example, considering available listings, that, as I said, most of them during this period have been reduced, but well, there are some regions like region 11 and 12 that there is important increase in these listings. So well, the behavior is not similar, it's not the same in all the regions. It's this deserves a more deep analysis. Occupancy rate also have increased, and some important difference between regions, but in general, well, we have higher occupancy rates, so we can see that the pressure of the demand is obvious in this market. We can see also this pressure if we analyze the average daily rate comparing these periods, where we can see that the increases are very, very important in most of the regions. This is, we suppose, is linked and demonstrate the pressure of demand and the length of stay that in most of the regions, as I said before, decreased. It's interesting, for example, have a closer look to region 11 and 12, where average daily rate increases a lot, but also occupancy rate increases in region 12, and the listings are increasing a lot. So, well, as I said before, we should have a closer analysis in these regions and markets. The fourth idea is what we call the dual impact of short-term rentals. We maybe, well, we could debate about this later, but we can divide the destinations into categories, two types. One that are more popular tourist destinations, where there are negative impacts that we are well aware of, and other regions, less known regions, where maybe through this supply, well, it's possible to gain some development from local tourism, These negative impacts is, of course, the impact of on long-term rental, the difficulties to access to this long-term rental, how the prices are increasing in the housing market, the increase of cost of living, pollution, and local business and respect for local traditions. So we're aware, of course, about all these difficulties and problems that are causing. But we think that it's important to do this dual analysis, because our regions are not the same in all parts, and inside our regions, really we can consider that they are not exactly the same in the whole that regions or cities. So we have somehow a dual market. Of course, as I said before, there are impacts very negative. We can consult different researches, but well, just as an example, we can look at this one. The title is "Do Short-Term Rental Platforms Affect Housing Markets? Evidence from Airbnb in Barcelona in 2019." These are the authors, and well, just to highlight what they stated, the estimated impact in neighborhoods with high Airbnb activity substantial. For neighborhoods in the top decile of Airbnb activity distribution, rents are estimated to have increased by 7%, while increases in transaction price are estimated at 19%. So, well, it's clear. But this is not contradictory what we said before, that we are probably in a dual market. And the fifth last idea is, okay, how can we use data to promote new research lines that really can help can help us to take better decisions through the knowledge that we are acquiring and the analysis that we are realizing. So we have identified three general study lines: identifying and monitoring saturated areas, more focus on these more popular tourism places; monitoring and helping to manage inconveniences for neighbors, for example, noise, antisocial behaviors, etc. And the third, which in the third part, we are going to talk more about this one, because we think that is the other side of the coin. It's a side that we really don't so focus on this other side. So how short-term rentals can help to reconvert destinations? Is this a possibility? And if this is real, how can we manage this? Avoid depopulation, can help in avoid depopulation in some places, reinforce local agriculture and cattle, promote tourism activities in rural areas. Well, it's more, as I said, the other side of the coin, and how the data analysis can help these other kind of destinations. So just to finalize, I'm before the brand is taking the floor. Our goal is we know that our understanding about short-term rental is limited. I'm sure that many of you that are watching this webinar are aware of a lot of the data that we are, of course, not putting on the table, but we could agree that is limited, and we need to go deeper in the analysis of the available data if we want to, as is our goal, try to build more sustainable destinations through this analysis. So I'm sure that in the second part, as I said, Bram will be able to add much more insights about this market. So I give the floor to Bram, and thank you very much. We will see in the round table. Thanks.
And thanks all to Nextour for having me on. This is a really great initiative and something that I'm very happy to be part of. I work for AirDNA as an economist, and what AirDNA does is it collects data on short-term rentals from mainly two platforms, Airbnb and VRBO. So we conduct very, very large-scale internet scrapes of these sites to find data, global data on short-term rentals. And as a result, we have enormous amounts of data, and it's very it's a lot of data. So it's very important to have these kind of partnerships to be able to analyze it, to be able to look at it, to be able to get the narrative and the insights from the data. Now, if I may, I'd like to paint a picture using some pretty broad strokes about the short-term rental market in Europe. It is. I'd like to be able to move past a point where we can stop talking, I guess, about the pandemic and recovery there. However, in the short-term rental industry, a pretty profound shift occurred during the pandemic that we are still seeing unfold. So it's really still very important and necessary to look at effects post-pandemic to try to get an idea about what's going on in the short-term rental market, how it may be different now than it has been in the past. So if we look at this slide right here, we see available listings, and those are individual properties that are listed on the platforms versus the demand, and those would be the nights that are actually stayed. Both of these indexed to February of 2020, right before the pandemic hit. Europe was a little bit more slow to recover than, say, some other countries, say North America, United States, or in South America, say Brazil. So if we look there, they opened up a little bit more quickly. Some might arguably say at a human cost in the U.S., but nevertheless, it did allow the short-term rental industry to recover somewhat more quickly. So we actually saw demand in the U.S. recover by March. In Brazil, more like May. And in Europe, it was more towards the end of 2022, so October, November. So, and it has just been very recently, this last month, that the available listings have recovered. So what we saw is a pretty big shift, pretty big change. About 20% of all the listings that we had pre-COVID sort of went away as we saw this tremendous reduction in demand as people were quarantining, sheltering, trying to prevent infection. So reducing their travel. As that demand has come back, there has been a delayed reaction for listings, and slowly that those have recovered as well. But they haven't necessarily recovered in exactly the same way they were before the pandemic, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But to look at some of the near-term dynamics, what about the occupancy? So if we look back, we saw that demand has been recovering more quickly than supply. And this has caused an increase in occupancy since, say, 2020 and 2021. So by 2022, we had gotten essentially back to where we were in 2019 before the pandemic. And during that summer, actually, we exceeded those levels, had some of the highest occupancies that we had ever seen in Europe in 2022. It remains to be seen. If we look at the early months, so far 2023 is following a very similar path to both 2019 and 2022. So we're going to see this summer if we're going to be following a more 2022 path, achieving higher occupancies, or if supply will have come in and started to reduce some of this constriction or this compression, I guess, during the summer months, and if we see a more stabilized 2019 type of level. But in any case, we're certainly well above where we were after the pandemic hit, and we're at a much more long-term steady state type of occupancy in Europe than we were in, say, 2021. Now this is in contrast to, say, in the U.S., where we did open up a little bit more quickly, and as a result, supply increased more quickly. And some might argue as well that in the United States, people were able to take advantage of lower interest rates, as the timing there put it before interest rate increasing regimes for, say, the European Central Bank or the U.S. Fed. So in the U.S., occupancies are actually lower than in 2023 than they were in 2022, which are in turn lower than the occupancies in 2021. So, there, I think it's an interesting picture. In Europe, we're seeing these stronger occupancies because supply was a little more constrained. And now that demand has been opening up, it's going to continue to be somewhat more constrained because of the higher interest rates that we see from the European Central Bank to combat inflation. So a little bit more of the recency here. So this is booking and demand in Europe. We did see strong recovery in 2022 because we did see a lot of that demand coming back. Things were opening up. There was a lot of pent-up demand. People were very eager to travel. One nice thing, though, is that a few months back, we were very concerned about this winter. We thought energy prices were going to be incredibly high. Some almost catastrophic predictions at the beginning of the season even saw it suggested that one might take a short-term rental in North Africa to save on heating costs in Europe. But while they were elevated, they weren't as apocalyptic as some might have predicted. We did see continuing demand increases throughout the season. We're starting to see those pick up again as we're moving into the summer travel season, and booking remains strong, which is a good sign, because that's going to determine our future demand. So if we have strong bookings today, we're going to have strong demand tomorrow. So, No, that's a little bit more recent. Now, if we look at Europe, a lot of the different countries developed a little bit differently. And again, some of this has to do with timing. Some of this has to do with changing preferences past COVID. And some of it has to do with regulation. So if we look here, there's a couple different groups. You've got this sort of big group in the middle, let's say between the Austria and the Czech Republic or Hungary, where we've seen occupancies increase as the demand has increased more strongly than the available listings. So this is a sort of a balanced opening. You would say reopening. You've got this big surge in demand, and it is being slowly followed up by increases in supply. So for right now, we've got small positive boosts in occupancy or unit level performance, which the hosts like. On the other end, you've got some of the Nordic countries which have been doing very well, but also have been increasing their supply at a much quicker rate. So we've got over here Finland, Sweden, and Norway with declining occupancies, because even though they've got very strong demand, they've also been able to increase their supply that much more quickly. Poland is up there as well. And there is some argument there that there is an increased sort of demand because of dislocation due to Russian aggression in Ukraine as sort of a demand driver there. But supply also in Poland increased very quickly, which has helped to decline its occupancy. And then if you look over here on the left, there are some of these markets which have seen very, very small or slight increases in 23 versus 2022 in April. So Croatia, Denmark, the Netherlands, these have somewhat of a mixed bag as far as their occupancy goes, because basically their available listings and their demand haven't changed very much, or maybe even have declined slightly since 2022. So sort of three broad buckets. You can see that performance recovery in Europe is quite a different picture depending on where you look as far as the countries go. Looking more broadly, something that I could say is that preferences have also determined to some extent how the recovery has happened in Europe. So after the pandemic, what we've certainly seen is a preference for less densely populated, more rural areas where there's more natural beauty, a little bit more isolation, a little bit more control over the social distancing. So that's certainly been a trend that we've seen post-COVID. To draw a very cartoonish picture, short-term rentals before the pandemic, they started out in very densely populated cities. In many cases, they competed more directly with hotels. They competed more on price. And after the pandemic, what we've seen is more interest, again, in these sort of rural, out-of-the-way areas, places with a lot of natural beauty, and greater control over again, the social distancing. In addition, we've also seen a lot of larger cities enacting some form of regulation, which has to some degree stymied development of supply. So as a lot of supply left during the pandemic, it was difficult to increase that supply. Again, the regulation kept it, in many cases, from increasing back to pre-pandemic levels. One thing that we've seen, though, is that in the Nordic countries, which, opened somewhat earlier and have had somewhat of a stronger recovery, we have seen good performance in those countries in their urban areas. So if we look here, this is Finland, Norway, and Sweden, and of course their capital cities. So they're most urbanized areas we would think. And in the case of Finland and in Norway, the capital cities outperforming the rest of the country as far as the recovery goes. Not the case in Sweden, though Stockholm still has seen some positive performance. So even within that, though, so Lapland was something that we wanted to look at more closely. Now in Finland, we just saw over here their capital city, Helsinki, has done a little bit better than the rest of the country. So that sort of conflicts a little bit with this idea of increasing interest in rural areas. On the other hand, even within Finland, which is something of an anomaly within Europe, we can see there is a pretty stark difference between, say, Lapland and the rest of Finland. Lapland being of the sparsest populated area in Finland, an area of incredible natural beauty, but also very rugged terrain. If you look over here in 2022, the annual available listings in Lapland, it made up about a tenth of the total available listings for Finland, but it made up almost a fifth of the demand. So it is a very high demand area, fetches higher rate than the rest of Finland, despite it being, again, in a very isolated parts and rugged parts of the country. Occupancies are higher there as well. So this isn't just seasonal travel. We see higher occupancy than the rest of Finland. So this speaks to enduring demand and desire to travel to Lapland. And what I also have here is growth from 2019. So the total available listings in Finland has actually declined a bit since the pandemic. It hasn't quite recovered to its full pre-pandemic level. However, if you look at Lapland, it is more than doubled since 2019. So enormously fast growth rates compared to the rest of the country. Demand growth is about 90.9% up. ADR growth is about in line with the rest of the country as well. So it has a higher ADR, but it grew about the same rate. And occupancy, whereas it declined in Finland as a whole, it has increased in Lapland. So I think that this points to, even in Finland, which has seen pretty good urban performance for Europe, even there we're seeing really outsized performance again for some of these rural out-of-the-way areas. And this is where short-term rentals, I think, have really been able to shine in post-pandemic. If even a small hotel of 50 to 100 rooms, it's a pretty significant capital investment, and you need density to support a structure like that. Short-term rentals can be much more spread out, and they can find their way into these rural and isolated places much more easily. The supply there is also flexible as well, so it can help accommodate even demand growth that is almost doubled in Lapland. It has been able to be accommodated because, again, that available listings growth can also grow very quickly as well. And if we look more generally, the demand outside of the big cities has been growing more quickly than inside of the big cities. So here, if we look at the purple, we see all of Europe available listings and European demand. Meanwhile, the orange and blue, we see the urban available listings and urban demand. And they started off more or less at very similar parts or similar levels. But as time has gone on, they have distanced themselves. So especially if you look at the available listings, urban available listings hasn't recovered yet to pre-pandemic levels, whereas Europe as a whole has. And demand, of course, is also separating as well. So there is a lot of interest here. We've got a lot of concentration of STRs early on in the cities, but post-pandemic, the big growth has been outside of the cities. So just to focus in, and this is sort of to underscore, I guess, the point about sort of that divide in the growth. I just have three sort of countries here that we can look at as examples, and they tell similar stories. But what I wanted to do here is to look at the growth and the available listings, which is outlined in the orangish tones, and demand, which is more the bluish tones. Now, as pointed out earlier, Paris is the leading city for the number of listings it has. And if we talk about concentration, France has probably got some of the biggest concentration in Paris. Paris with about 60,000 listings on average a month. The second runner-up in France is Marseille with about 13,000, so almost 1/5 of what Paris has. So France has had an incredible concentration of short-term rentals, a lot of them in Paris, and it's been like that. But if you'll notice here, since 2019, we're starting to see something of a catch-up effect for the rest of the country, because the listings and the demand is the lowest right there in Ile-de-France, where Paris is located. Where is it increasing the most quickly? Well, in the northern coast. We've seen a lot of interest there in coastal resort areas, also mountain resort areas. So French Alps skiing. Certainly, we've seen quite a few resorts there, see a lot of success. But also in the middle of France, in central France, in the areas around Paris, but not in Ile-de-France, we're seeing big increases there in demand. So it's very interesting. I love the French market because it is very diverse. It's got a lot of different location types there, and it's seeing, I think, the strongest growth again in some of the less populated areas, and is becoming less concentrated since the pandemic, from a state of incredible concentration. If we look at Spain, we see something similar. Is Madrid increasing quickly? Is Barcelona increasing quickly? No, it's the opposite. What we're seeing is some of the areas in Andalusia, including in the interior, where we're seeing some big listing and demand growth, not just on the southern coast, but in the interior of the country as well. So that is that's a very interesting development. Galicia as well, seeing some outsized growth. And again, not just on the coast, but also in some of the interior regions as well. So again, there's evidence here of a catch-up effect. And I think it shows that STRs do have an incredible role to play in encouraging tourism, not just to the most well-traveled, most populous areas, but also areas of agricultural interest, rural areas, undiscovered places, isolated places, where they have quite a bit more flexibility than traditional hotels. Finally, we've got Italy. And again, a similar story here. The big growth not seen where Rome and Florence are, or Milan, but in some of the mountainous regions. We're seeing the East Coast get quite a bit of growth. Calabria getting a bit of growth. And up there in the Italian Alps as well, seeing some outside demand growth. So again, people looking for, I think, beauty outdoors. They're looking for places that they haven't explored before, and seeking new experiences, especially since the pandemic. So all of these, I think, show a lot of potential and a lot of ability for short-term rentals to sort of fill in the gaps where a lot of traditional hotels would not be able to locate. So that is my presentation. Feel free to email me any questions here. And thanks again to Nextdoor for letting me present some of this data.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, thank you, Bram, for your awesome insights about short-term rental in Europe. Very, very interesting. My name is Daniel Iglesias, and I work as a data scientist at the Tourism Tomorrow Lab, which is a Nextdoor department. We are in charge of providing data consultancy services to destinations in order to help them to be more sustainable. And as you can see in the events agenda, in this third part, we will try to fit the sustainability variable in this topic. We know that short-term rental is quite controversial in tourism, but at the same time, we think that as a professional, we should propose new approaches. We want to make and test new hypotheses, and we want to monitor results and impacts. So let me share with you my presentation. Yeah. For this purpose, in this part, we are going to go one step further, and I want to share with you some project proposals that we have brainstormed internally. And the starting point is an hypothesis that we want to test. Okay? And the hypothesis is, can short-term rental supply contribute to boosting rural areas development through tourist activity? This is our hypothesis. And the background from this proposal can be shown in this picture. We have three of the main pillars at the European level. We have rural development, that is an issue that we have to deal, and it's very important for Europe. We have tourism as one of the most important economic sectors in Europe. We have the sustainability that is a must for not just for tourists, but for all the initiatives across Europe. And we have short-term rental. This is the topic today. And we're going to try to make a proposal, a specific project that try to fit all of them together. So just to provide you some context, the European Union has a rural development policy that has three main goals. The first one is to improve the competitiveness of the agriculture. The second one is to achieve sustainable management of natural resources and climate action, and also to achieve a balanced territorial development of rural areas. And specifically, this policy mentions a tool to achieve those objectives. You can see highlighted there. The creation of jobs outside the agricultural industry and the development of tourism-related activities. So here we can see one link between rural development and tourism activity. Okay, we have our hypothesis, but we need, in order to properly define the project, we need to set up some requirements of limitation. We are talking about development, and the first question we must ask ourselves is under what circumstances? Because development should not be the goal by itself. We should promote development that is aligned with the existing capabilities. Okay, and this is very important because we are talking about rural areas, rural destinations, and it's very important to be aligned with the existing capabilities that are very different from those, for example, in cities. This leads us to the second requirement, that is that we should promote a sustainable development. This is a must for all of our actions. The third one is that we need an analytical approach for our proposal. That is, data might lead us to propose and take hypotheses, to design and apply policies, and to measure the impacts and the results. This is very important. And the fourth one, we have to be open to study other best practices, other use cases that are out there, but not only in the tourist industry, but in other sectors that can be relevant for us. Just to highlight the importance of the analytic approach, the European Union, every time they deal with certain rentals, the regulation or other publications, they always state that there is a need of a transparency for this kind of accommodation. We need data, quality data, and updated data in order to design and apply policies, to, as I said, to monitor and to track the impacts and results. Okay. And at this point of my speech, and in order to introduce some concepts that I think they are very interesting and relevant for our purpose, I want to introduce you Professor Lluís Prats from the University of Girona. Lluís and his team has developed a very interesting research area with a very interesting concept. One of them is the concept of accommodation hub, that is a concentration of accommodation in rural areas that is needed to trigger touristic activity around this hub. But I think it's better that Professor Lluís can explain us deeper. So, Lluís, yeah, thanks for being here with us, and let's proceed. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you to all the people who was before me, because you made my presentation easier, in the sense that you really presented the whole world of the short-term rentals. And obviously we are not only members of Nextur, but also collaborating with the Tourism of Tomorrow Lab and we were trying to develop new ways of approaching different issues and different effects that tourism has, and especially as Daniel said, we will focus today on the concept of accommodation hubs, and I will try to explain you that in very short and very clear way. First of all, let me just explain you, and if you can pass the slide, Danny, please. Let me give you the background we had. Do we have a problem? Our perspective is that we really need to switch the idea of problems into effects. I mean, every single human activity has effects, tourism has effects, accommodation has effects. So as we understood with Jose Luis and Bram's presentation, positive and negative. So concentrating on effects, we can put the focus on maximizing the positive and minimizing the negative, which is what we all want in terms of achieving sustainability and competitiveness at the same time. So what's happening with accommodation and its effects? Obviously, there exist, but we need to really understand the complexity of those effects. I mean, really diverse, really extreme, and really opposite. I mean, some of the questions that I've been reading, for instance, in terms of, let's say, length of a stay, in terms of pressure of a certain destination, in terms of many ways. So this is the first step to understand, and this is probably the issue that I want to highlight today, is that the standards are not valid anymore. We've seen the example of Lapland, for instance, and I will show you other examples where if we think that creating a standard for the whole Finland will be enough. No, that's not anymore a possibility. But if we focus on short-term rentals, it seems that it is a kind of a new phenomenon, but it is a new phenomenon, really? In my opinion, no. I mean, especially the last 2-3 decades of the last century, the second housing effect, starting with the domestic tourism expansion in the developed countries, generated a huge debate on this problem of second housing. In that time, for instance, things about acculturation was the main problem. I mean, gentrification was not even there. Was a matter of just changing the nature of the places. For whatever reason, this went out of the scene, and even during the 90s of the last century and the beginning of the 2000s, appeared another concept that was the rural emptiness. So the people leaving the rural areas to go to the cities, to the urban areas, and making that the rural spaces became isolated and difficult to live in. And at that time, even in the case of Italy, appeared something called the concept of the albergo diffuso, which was a way to try to fight a bit this rural emptiness, making available accommodation in rural areas using empty houses, but managed by the local community. So this is just to say that this is not a new phenomenon. This is something quite common in tourism since the very beginning. And the main issue now is that we are focusing a lot more on its on its effects. But let's try to explain you a bit more with examples what we are trying to develop as new ways of managing these possible effects. Dan, if you could pass. We try to build the accommodation hub concept. And this is an image of what an accommodation hub might be. Don't worry, because I will explain you what is all behind there. But what we did for several years already was to analyze the real consumption patterns of tourists in rural areas. Why we did so? Because we wanted to understand which is the behavior in areas where, for instance, mobility is an issue, where the number of available services might be an issue, where the kind of attractions might be also an issue. And at the end, we discovered that we had two main results in all kind of areas in rural environments. One was attraction hubs, so those kind of attractions that are visited by nearly everybody visiting the area, and then the accommodation hubs, so where the people choose to, for instance, stay during their visit to the rural area. And this is one example. Arnes is a very small town which has several beds and several rural houses as accommodation and 2 hotels. And from there, you can see the different lines, especially the let's say the thick ones are the most visited attractions from that accommodation hub. And you will see that there's a wide range of attractions visited, but there are like several which are prominent, clearly. So meaning that where we are actually staying or living or sleeping, it's really emphasizing the kind of destination that we are visiting. Yeah. If we can go to the next, please, Danny. And something that we really observed is that, especially in rural areas, people tend to visit close by areas or close by attractions. And this is the time distance that the tourists are eager to travel to visit some attractions. Yeah, so which are, let's say, their trips to visit different places. And you can see in here that the vast majority of the attractions visited are within 20, maximum 25 minutes distance from the accommodation point. That's relevant because, for instance, those are data that can help us to further understand not only if we had an increase or a decrease in terms of demand or supply. This is really knowing which sense has to have different accommodation hubs or not. So, for instance, in rural areas, we might ask ourselves if we need more or less accommodation hubs, or if we need more or less short-term or long-term rentals to understand the different tourism experience. If we can move on, Danny, that's a small map to make you aware of something that is quite relevant also for what we are talking about today. You can see here in different blue colors the percentage of tourism beds in front of residents. And we see with the dark blue some municipalities, especially in the coastline, and some in the mountain area close to the ski resort, where there's more than 20% of tourism accommodation in relation with the number of residents of these municipalities. This is in Catalonia. So this is the map of Catalonia, just to make sure that you understand where we are. Let's say on the right side, we will have the Mediterranean Sea. On top, we will have Andorra and France. And on the left side, we have Aragon and Valencia as part of Spain as well. So you can see where if we only pay attention to this ratio between residents and tourists, where there's, or we can say that there's a missing problem of tourism accommodation, which is the more clear blue areas. But I don't know if you noticed that, but Barcelona, which is somewhere here in the center, I don't know if probably you will not see my pointer. So, but it's in the center of the coastline. It appears as a clear blue. But we understood that Barcelona has a kind of a problem of let's say short-term rentals, massive numbers, or at least that's one of the things that they decided. Why I'm saying with this, if we only focus on one single data, probably we will have a kind of biased view of the whole thing. And that's the main issue. To eliminate this bias, we need to put not only the data that, for instance, Bram presented, not only the data that we could collect with the real consumption patterns, but we need to build up data that might be helpful for all kind of realities, you know. And that's a bit, again, to finish, the main idea that I want to transfer today. Accommodation is key for destinations, especially for rural destinations, but standards cannot be applied to everywhere. That's a real issue. This was the message that I wanted to send. So, Danny, I give you back the floor if you want.
Thank you very much, Luis, for your insights, awesome insights. Thank you for sharing them with us. Just to finish this part, as I promised at the beginning, I want to introduce you this analytical approach to test that hypothesis that can short-term rental supply contribute to boosting rural areas development through tourist activity. We have brainstormed a proposal in 4 phases. The first one is called candidates identification. The second one is called candidates filtering. Third one called candidates qualification. And the last one is called candidates finding methodology. Let me give you briefly some details about each one of them. In the first phase, candidate identification will perform a search based on short-term rental property availability in rural areas and its variation over time. We will focus on rural areas and rural destinations. We will try to identify those rural destinations that have suffered and significant growth in the certain rental offer in the last years. And here, there is the first parameter that we have to agree, that is what does significant growth means in rural areas, because this parameter is going to set up the threshold for our search. And obviously, for this task, we have an AirDNA, which is the leading platform for certain rental and data analytics. And the output of this first step is a list of potential candidates, a list of potential rural destinations that has suffered and relevant and significant growth, certain rental offer in the last years. The second one is the candidate filtering phase, where we are going to select and filter out those candidates, initial candidates that are not relevant for an analysis. Obviously, this filtering activity has to be carried out by local experts, which can tell us, for example, if one rural destination, one candidate can be considered a rural destination, or maybe they have another specificity that invalidate them to be taken into account for our analysis. And the result will be a list of curated list of candidates. In the third one phase, candidate qualification, we are going to select a range of variables such as demographic data, economic data, point of interest distribution and typology, services and infrastructure availability, maybe the proximity to other centers of population. And in order to complement this quantitative data, we will take into account another qualitative data, such as best practices or special requirements and conditions for each one of them. And the result will be the curated list of destinations expanded with the value of those variables for each one of them. And in the fourth and final step, we will try to close the loop, to close the cycle. We will try to develop a methodology that is going to be able to discover and to rank new candidates. That is, rural destinations that, based on their suitability, to take advantage of certain rental to boost their tourist activity, and in this way to help to contribute to the rural development. As you can see, this is an analytical approach that we wanted to share with all of you in order to test our hypothesis. I want to invite you to if you are interested in it, maybe you are on destination and you want to check if this makes sense to develop some of your rural destination. Maybe you are DMO or policymaker and you want to research group and you want to develop with us your knowledge or your experience about. This is just a proposal. I mean, we are open to receive your feedback. Maybe you have a totally different approach. We will be happy to receive all your feedback. And now I think we have 10 or 15 minutes to try to answer your question, to share the ideas with all the attendants. So please feel free to use the chat in the different channels in LinkedIn and YouTube to make your questions. And I'm going to invite to the screen the other speakers. My colleague Ana Moniche, senior statistician for the ToT Lab, Brian Gallagher, José Luis Córdoba, Luis Prats, and let me introduce you my colleague Irene Paloeli, who is the head of communication of Nestur, and he will be moderating this questions and answers part.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you to our panelists for this insightful presentation, and thank you to all participants for following us from this certain place. We can see that we have participants from California, from Oregon. So let's start this Q&A session from the audience with the first question. So in Europe, is there a concern that short-term rentals are taking away available workforce housing or driving up the cost of housing for full-time residents? I will give this question to Jose Luis, please.
Well, it's a very important question, and as I said in my presentation, from the study that was conducted by different researchers in Barcelona University and other researchers, we cannot avoid that short-term rentals in some saturated areas are damaging the the people that are looking for houses in this area. So this is a reality, and there are many studies that demonstrate this reality. So we can look for constructive ways of being supported by short-term rentals, but in certain areas, I think that we have to recognize this problem.
Great. Thank you, Jose Luis. So let's jump into the next question. That is there any benchmark data currently used to measure emission of short-term rentals? So let's give this to Ana Moniche from Tourism of Tomorrow Lab, please.
Hello. There is no clear answer to this question. There is an universally recognized benchmark data specifically focused on measuring the emissions from short-term rentals. There are efforts underway to build a common system that is used for benchmarking and quantify the impact on sustainability of the whole tourism sector, including also the use of this accommodation. If we want to assess the emissions of short-term rentals, we need to take into account a similar emission produced by residents as they're using the similar type of accommodation. But we need to understand the specific patterns of tourists as consumers, because they will have a different pattern somehow as residents. For example, the most important mission of tourists is related to transport. So it is important also to identify the type of transport used by these tourists, the specific patterns of consumption that of the tourists using short-time rentals. So it is true that traditional hotels provide overall a more structured and regulated framework for measuring, but it is not easy either to find data to benchmark their emissions either. So this is a common issue, a common problem. Overall, we need to take into account factors such as energy consumption, water usage, waste generation of this type of accommodation. So the key of implementing sustainable tourism policies is to integrate non-tourism data into this equation of the whole data for tourism. And this is especially difficult for commodities such as energy, water, and also for aspects of waste management and circularity. And this is not just an issue for short-term rentals, but for the overall tourism. But we also need to take into account transportation-related emission that, as I said before, these are the most important one in the whole transport industry. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Anna, for your insights. So let's go next. So I see a question here for Bram. So does AirDNA have occupancy rates data? How do you get it?
Yeah, that's thank you. That's a good question. It's a valid concern. Now we scrape data so we can only sort of observe what is being presented to the public for a lot of the properties. So the solution we came up with some years ago is that we collaborated with MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, to develop a machine learning algorithm to identify blocked versus booked days. So it's a 16-factor algorithm. It is continuously learning using new data, and we benchmark it against a few different sources, one of which is Airbnb's public reports. So it will detail occupancies. We can compare how close that we are to their official estimates. And we also have about a little bit more than a million now listings that are reporting their data directly to us. So what we can do is use the algorithm to predict the occupancies for those million and see how well that we've done. And it's very accurate. We're getting better all the time. Certain things do pop up from now and then. Our data team is very good at identifying new things that occur, but it's very accurate, between 96 and 98% accurate, using that large sample that we've got. But it's an important concern. It may in very certain circumstances may overstate or understate occupancy to some degree, but we believe we have the best estimate that is available.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Bram. We still have a follow-up question still related with the occupancy data, so I will give also this to you, Bram. So how confident are you with the occupancy data? As far as I know, AirDNA cannot know it. They assume that when a house disappears from the web, then it has been rented, but other uses are possible.
Yeah, no, it's a very similar question to the previous one, and I'm very confident again, because we can compare this data to known a pool of known listings between, like I said, 96 and 98% accurate. We're always working to improve that, and we're also keeping track, of course, changes to the listings on Airbnb site due to policy changes and that sort of thing. Whether there are caps on how far out you can list properties. Those sorts of changes are we pay very close attention to incorporate them. And we also can compare Airbnb data with VRBO. There are a lot of properties that are listed on both platforms. We also go through an extensive process to remove duplicates, but it also gives us another sort of point of comparison. We can look at that shared sample to see if we get consistent behavior.
Great, thank you, Bram. So let's move to the next question. We still have some minutes. So what are the short-term rentals' main sustainable challenges in urban areas? So this time we can do on voluntary basis. Who would like to reply?
We think that there are many challenges in urban areas. As I answered before, we are struggling with many things. But which are the main is difficult to really evaluate the main ones. I would say that the problem is that probably the demand is very concentrated in certain places, and this is not only a matter of the short-term rentals. I mean, the demand is concentrated, and this is causing some effects. That one of them is the supply that is concentrated in those places. So maybe we should understand or analyze the problem from a more high perspective. So why is demand so concentrated in these places? What can we do to manage these flows of people and to manage our destinations to get a more balanced distribution of the demand? So I would say that, of course, short-term rentals are there because the demand are there, and we are not going to debate about how to regulate or how to manage this, but the reality is that is there is because the demand is there. So how do we manage this demand and distribute this thing in the whole territory? Maybe this is a more global perspective or approach to the problem.
Great. Thank you, Jose Luis. So we have here another question still from you, Jose Luis. So because, we know that short-term rentals have this kind of this duality. There are some destinations that have problems with it, with the saturation, and then there are emerging destinations that need more demand, so that it's important for them. So our data can help improve this duality between the destination that have problems with the saturation and emerging destination that need demand.
maybe this is the main thing about this webinar. How can we use data? How can we use data to manage these flows of tourists and to benefit some places and to reduce negative impacts in other places? This is what we have to resolve between all the people and the regions and the partners, private companies that are involved in this. We need the data, we need analysis, and we need to focus on this. So the data, but the data is a key to be able to understand what is happening and to manage this phenomenon. I don't know what my colleagues think about this, but I don't know, Luis or Bram or Danny, what do you think of?
I was about to also answer, because it's obvious that data might help, and especially knowing what short-term rental means in every destination. Just to give you an example that I'm quite familiar with, in the city of Girona, where I live and work, the most impact or effect on short-term rentals is regarding international students. So, I mean, we consider them tourists. Well, we can consider them tourists, of course, but they are coming especially for university purposes in that sense. So understanding that might help us to really manage tourism in a better way.
Great, great. So let's jump into the last question that the time is running. So what could be some key indicators to take into account to measure the short-term rentals accommodation impacts on the destinations? Anna, please.
Hi, boys. I think I'm going to answer very shortly. I think the key here is to identify the type of destination. If we are talking about, for example, an urban destination with a high degree of saturation, maybe we need to, the key indicator should be those social indicators, resident attitudes, what the residents think about this important flow of tourism, how they affect to the daily life. But if we are talking about rural destinations that are not that are in need to diversify their economy, we need to take into account, for example, if they have a relevant resource that attract a lot of tourists that don't stay over the night. So one-day travelers, and then we can identify if they have this attraction, this tourism attraction that could benefit from, for example, having this type of short rental accommodation for the boost of the tourism economy to complement with, for example, agriculture or other type of more traditional economy.
Great, thank you, Anna, thank you, everyone. So let's wrap up this webinar. Thank you for this interesting Q&A session, and thank you to the participants for your active participation. So I give now the floor to Nextur Managing Director Cristina Núñez for some closing remarks. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Irene, and the rest of the team for this very insightful conversation. I was taking note while listening to you, so let's see if I managed to share some takeaways, some learnings I think are interesting that we collected together today. First, I noted that from my perspective, yes, this data that Bram presented from AirDNA can help us to definitely understand, give us a good picture in terms of the economic activity that short-term rental accommodation activity represents globally, but also in Europe where we operate, from the demand, from the supply side. And also, anticipate some trends. And for me, what is interesting is from those trends, which assumptions can we make for planning, for managing tourism in a better way, as Luis was saying. Secondly, and very much related to it, the clear diversity of destinations that the data has shown to us in terms of the profiles, in terms of the needs, the challenges. We tend to see very much the urgent challenge and constraint we have with the pressure in some of the saturated destinations. And we should have a more holistic view in terms of what opportunities this trend show us. We know that there is appetite for visitors to go out of dense visited places. We know we want all to experience more genuine and sustainable experiences out of concentrated areas. And here the data we show is that there is a demand and also a supply, that is an opportunity to perhaps deconcentrate and reach out better balance of the visitor flows in some of our countries, in some of our destinations. But for that to happen, and before going too far, is there any measurability? Is there any possibility for us to anticipate, to forecast those visitor flows? This is something that I would personally like to know. Is there any way that to cross-check this data with bookings in a way that we can help preparing destinations to welcome those visitors? Is there a way we can then use this data to focus our marketing efforts? And then also the elephant in the room is where and how we can put the limit of our destination capacity for our communities. These are some. This is some food for thought. From my perspective, I believe that what we all aim is to have better places to live, better places to visit, so a more balance between the economic, environmental, and sociocultural needs, so the well-being of our communities. So my final thought was about what kind of partnerships we can build. And more precisely, what Anna was mentioning, destinations are working very hard to develop, some are more advanced, these metrics to measure success, how success looks like for our destinations. So here my question is how we can make sure that short-term rental accommodation is part of the plan, is part of the game in creating those spaces for sharing data, those spaces for transparency and trust of the data, in a way that together with the destinations, we can have this 360 degrees analysis that we need in order to develop the right policy actions, the actionables and the effects that Luis was mentioning. That's from what we could collect today. This was our very first step into this new research line and proposal that Daniel Iglesias shared with all of us today for ToT Lab team to think about it, collecting your feedback as Daniel and Jose Luis invite you. We don't have all the answers to all the questions. We still have a lot of challenges ahead, but we are confident that we can keep working together and build these solutions. Yes, the presentations will be available to all of you. And I take the chance to thank you for your active participation, for bringing your questions to the debate in a very constructive way. A big thanks to Bram, to AirDNA for this very fruitful collaboration from my perspective. Thank you very much to you. Thank you to the ToT Lab team, Daniel, Jose Luis, and Ana. Thank you to the colleagues and to all of you. Keep safe and see you soon.